back. We were talking about myths in our previous segment, and we're going to just keep talking about myths. But instead of those of the finance variety, we are talking about those of the admissions variety. And joining me is my longtime colleague, Karen Spencer, who is a former admissions officer at both Georgetown and Franklin and Marshall. Hi, Karen.
Beth, how are you?
I'm good. It's very nice to have you on the show today.
I love being on the show. Although I had to shower. I didn't used to have to shower before I got on the show when we started going to Zoom, and now you make me shower. So maybe I get a little less.
We thought our audience would like to see our faces too from time to time. So, all right. When we were talking about all the different myths that are out there, we've covered a number of these in some previous segments. But today I was hoping to cover a few that are a little bit more recent that we're seeing crop up that are, frankly, to me, a little mystifying. I don't know where this first one is coming from. I had never heard it before. And then suddenly this year I'm hearing it everywhere. So all I can imagine is that someone somewhere wrote a blog and took a stand and made a statement, and
too many people read it.
Too many people read it. Exactly. So I actually heard this on a call last week, and you did too, I think maybe earlier this week, but here it is. I should only list activities that are important and in which I excel or have won an award. So yeah, I played lacrosse, but I'm not really that good. I'm not a starter. I mostly sit on the bench. So I wasn't planning on including that in my activities list.
Right. I heard this too, and I don't know why. I don't know why all of a sudden. Like, why? What does this have to do with the pandemic? Like, it seems too correlated, but I don't understand why. They don't make any sense. My rule of thumb has always been, and it hasn't changed this year, if you've done it since the 9th grade, put it down. Okay. Yeah. Keep in mind, like, this is what I don't understand. Like, people are like, well, I'm much better at theater than I am at, to your point, like, say, playing lacrosse. I'm like, well, if you're not a theater, like, a lot of these things you're not going to be doing in the same capacity in college anyway. Like, that's not always the point. The point is that you were an active and engaged high school student, which makes me believe you will be an active and engaged college student, maybe in the same kinds of ways, maybe in different ways, right? But 2% of high school athletes play college sports. So 98% of you weren't doing this here anyway, at least not in a, varsity capacity. So that was never an issue about what we thought, you were. So I don't understand this at all. So my advice still stands. If you've done it since the 9th grade, put it down.
Yeah, this is madness. I don't know any other way to put it than that. There are 10 spots available on the Common application. There are more on the UC application. If you don't have 10 things, not a problem. That is not a problem. But if you have 10 and you're only listing 4 because you're under the misguided assumption that, well, they only really want to hear about what I've really been committed to, put that away immediately. And like you said,
tell your friends to put that away immediately.
Exactly. If you've done it since 9th grade. Now, yes, do you want to lead with the stuff that you've been most involved in? And maybe you have excelled at? Absolutely. But it should be on there regardless. If you did it, put it on there.
Agreed.
Can't say it. Yes. So one thing that actually has come up related to this, and this isn't really a myth, it's more of people don't really know what to do. A number of students maybe had lined up some really interesting things to do with their summer, or they had planned to play a spring sport. Lacrosse comes up because my son was going to play lacrosse as a 10th grader. He hadn't played as a 9th grader. All of that obviously went kaplooey and didn't happen. So what are your thoughts on putting something down that you had intended to do, but COVID prevented it?
Right. I mean, I think you can absolutely mention that, like, either in the additional information section. Some people are putting it in the COVID section because they don't really have anything to put in the COVID section, which, by the way, is fine. I'm sure you've already discussed this on a radio show. But if you want to put it there, I think you can just say, I had intended to do the blah, 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 whatever the blah, blah, blah was, but due to COVID, I was unable, or we had to go online, or whatever it is that happened to it. And it doesn't have to be a whole deal. Just put it down like it was supposed to happen, and we'll know about it, right? It's not your fault it didn't happen. I also don't need the woe is me, like, it was so tragic that I got it. Just put down the activity, move on.
Right, exactly. So because as one of our colleagues said, it's not like all the work that went into, getting that internship suddenly disappears because the internship itself didn't happen. So there's no harm, right, in mentioning it. And I think that's a really good idea. You don't have to, but if you want to, you can.
Okay.
So the only reason I specify that is because I have had students who pivoted, so who planned to do one thing, but then that didn't work out. So then they did something else, and the something else they did was super interesting.
Right.
So, I think when you have interesting things to write about, you don't have to add the stuff that you didn't get to do, but you can. All right, next one. Also very much related to the times that we are in. We are seeing many colleges go test optional, some even test blind, where they won't even look at scores, even if you have them. And then what we're seeing is people thinking that activities and essays are suddenly going to become a much bigger part, right, of the process than they normally have been. What's your take on this one?
So that's funny, because my 1:00 call today said those exact words. She's like, so my essay is going to be way more important. I'd be like, incorrect. So the first thing I always remind people is that test optional is not new, right? Test optional is simply new to some of these colleges, right? So people have been doing this for a while, right? And I will say I worked at a test optional college 20 years ago when I worked at Franklin and Marshall. And, so I know of which I speak, right? So anytime someone goes test optional and you're not submitting testing, whether it's you actually couldn't take it or you did and just didn't like your scores, right? We're going to double down on your transcript, right? Period. That's what we're doing, right? Because you've removed 50% of generally the academic information we normally looked at. And so if you remove that 50%, I'm going to have to spend twice as much time on this document over here, right? Sometimes students would be like, oh, I'm so glad I'm applying to school test optional. My testing isn't great. This is back before COVID. And I'm like, yeah, but your transcript isn't great either. Like, right. this is not helping you. So if your transcript, like test optional is really helping those students who had a fantastic transcript, perhaps not great testing, or simply in this case, didn't get to test, which is a lot of you, by the way. You're not alone. And so if you're that student for whom you have a great transcript, this is a great option for you. But it doesn't mean all of a sudden your essays are worth 3 times what they used to be, yes. Right? That's not true, right? Now, might I look at your teacher recs a little bit more closely just to see, like, intellectual curiosity, anything else that can talk to your intellectual abilities, because again, I am missing this somewhat large detail for a lot of schools. Sure, I might be looking at even a little bit more closely, but I was probably reading them to begin with, right? So they were already a piece of the puzzle. They're just still a piece of the puzzle.
Right, exactly. I think the key to this myth is the idea that somehow those pieces will be much more important, whereas all it really does is make the transcript most important. And one thing you mentioned was the academic record. So we often talk about the quantitative versus the qualitative. And there are definitely a number of schools out there that do primarily a quantitative evaluation. So most of their decision is grades, rigor, and test scores. And so you have, in that sense, cut out one of those pieces. But I don't think that they're suddenly going to introduce the idea that the other pieces now are so much more important. They're just like what you said. They're going to throw more emphasis on that transcript. That's what they're going to use. And I think the other point you made when we were talking earlier, so at Penn, you're ranking each individual section of the application. There's a qualitative ranking that students get. I'm sorry, there's a quantitative ranking, an academic rating, if you will. There's a rating assigned to the recommendation letters. There's a rating assigned to the essay, to the activities. So all that's going to happen is that academic rating is only going to be based on the rigor and the grades that you earned. It just won't include the test scores, but it's still going to be your academic rating, and it's still going to be counted proportionally the same as the other stuff, right? That's on there. So I think hand in hand with this is the idea, and this is a favorite, that this is the year to apply to all the Ivies, because you never know. My least favorite. Well, you never know. Well,
actually, we do. We do know. Actually, you might, but we do.
Yes, right. Exactly. And so what is your, what do you think about that somehow, because now testing isn't considered, that this is the year to apply the Ivies?
Listen, I understand. We are all in kind of uncharted waters here. I get it. This is all new. I love it when people are like, so what is going to happen? I'm like, have I ever lived through a pandemic before? No, I haven't. So I don't know. But I can tell you are some things that really don't change in a pandemic, right? Like what the Ivies are looking for, or the pseudo Ivies, or whatever even is a huge reach for you. It doesn't even have to be the Ivy. It could be whatever's a huge reach for you, right? Are looking for the same things they were looking for before.
Yes.
Right. So I know you've talked on your show a lot about, how colleges of that super selective variety are generally looking for what we call a distinguishing excellence, right? In other words, why do I need to take you and not the last 9 kids I read that looked also fantastic, right? What are you so phenomenal at that I just feel compelled to take you, right? If you don't have that thing, your SATs weren't your problem, right? Like there's all these other things or for reasons that students get into the Ivy League or super selective colleges get in there with, right? Testing was one of those pieces, but most of the kids who apply to the Ivies have the testing needed to get in, right? So that was just one piece. They have all these other pieces that are phenomenal, right? And so I think you have to think, am I that student for whom I actually do have that? When you think about phenomenal, I would never describe myself as phenomenal. Okay, maybe that's also why I didn't go to the Ivy League, which is fine. I'm clearly a gainfully employed human being, but like I didn't do something in a phenomenal way, right? And so if you do something in a phenomenal way, you are a nationally ranked something, you are a state champion and or do have some kind of distinguishing excellence, and you've got a killer transcript. And really the only piece that was missing from really being a contender was your testing. For that small sliver of the population, sure, this is probably a good year for you or a better year for you.
Yes.
For the rest of you, if the testing was never great, but you're also not outstanding in these kind of other capacities, and I'm not trying to be snarky, but for schools that take 5% of the applicant pool, right? I always tell a student, like, do you think you're like one of the best 5% of students in the world? Like, think about like what that means, right? Like, again, there's a reason I didn't apply because I knew that was not me. So, I think, is that describing you in every other capacity? If it's not, then this is still not a year for you, right? You're still not a competitor in that environment.
Right, exactly. I think this is definitely a year where we may see that some schools are just a little bit easier to get into, but you still need to find your sweet spot. And for students who weren't even considering the Ivies before, for all the reasons that you just laid out, that hasn't changed just because now they're not going to be looking at the test scores that weren't quite there. If the rest is not quite there, then you're not quite there. Exactly. Right. And also probably unsurprising to everyone out there, the Ivies are likely to be one of the least impacted by all of this.
Right.
They're going to be able to fill their class, even if it's going to be remote for another year. They're still people are still going to Yale. They're still going to go to Stanford. They're still going to be applying. So I just don't think we're going to see massive changes there.
That's right.
Last one, because we actually have a little bit of time for this. Not much, though.
For us.
I know. And this is also related to COVID-19. And this is around, we talk about demonstrated interest, which is basically engaging with a college in advance of applying, and in some cases after applying, so that they know you actually are really interested and you're not just throwing in an application. And I think generally we all agree that the best way to demonstrate interest typically is visiting. However, right now, not really possible. And so we're hearing from people, well, I don't need to worry about that. I can't visit. They know I can't visit. So no big deal. However, not true. What can you tell us about that?
So at that night, my same 1 o'clock call said the same thing to me. She was like, well, I've really done any of the research because, we can't visit. So kind of thing. I was like, wrong answer. Really, it has never, and listen, I agree. There's no replacement for the college visit. There just isn't. That sucks. I'm with you, but you can't do anything about it. So what you can do though is, listen, we've been living in, these conditions for 7-8 months. Colleges have put together a very robust online platform to listen to an admissions officer give an information session, which by the way, is the same information, whether you were listening to it online or in the admissions office. Like that information hasn't changed. So it would behoove you to listen to that. There's some virtual tours. Admittedly, some of these are better than others. Some of them are great. Some of them are like, these are not great. But a lot of colleges who used to track what we call demonstrated interest are tracking whether or not you've done these things. Yes. And to be honest, there's really no reason you haven't. Most students have had an abundant amount of free time. since March, more than they would have normally. You can do this on a Saturday, right? You don't have to make an appointment. Sunday in your pajamas, you could be watching that information session. And again, a lot of these schools are tracking to see if you've done so the same way they would have said, did you visit us, right? And again, in this case, there's really no reason you haven't. So if you haven't done these things, you need to do so kind of ASAP.
Yes, totally agree. Get on mailing lists. Actually, my son and I did a Penn State info session last night. It was kind of cool. We didn't have to go anywhere. We literally fired up his computer, logged in at 8. We were done at 9. It was actually kind of nice. And then I didn't have to like slog through a tour, which I've done probably too many of those in my time. But they're doing a better job of this because of the times that we live in.
They have to, right?
I know, exactly. Karen, thank you so much for joining today. I really appreciate it.
Nice to be on. Nice to see you, literally.
Exactly. And for all of you who are listening to this and not having any idea what we're talking about, we do tape these and we put them up on our YouTube channel so you can see us while we talk. All right. Next week, I am back. It's our 300th show. We're talking supplemental essays for the University of Washington, including their honors program and Arizona State's honors program. And we're answering your questions. If you have them, send them to us, gettingin.voiceamerica@gmail.com, or send them in via our Facebook page or our Instagram, College Coach BH. And don't forget, we're here every Thursday at 1 p.m. Pacific and 4 p.m. Eastern.